How to Analyze People, Verbal and Nonverbal Communication, Flirting, and Abuse. Written by Aries Helen. Narrated by Dean Collins. Chapter 1. The Body Language Myth. Is 93% of all communication really nonverbal? It's usually said that more than 93% of all communication is nonverbal. Given the effort we put into picking our words, for example, our verbal communication, can this figure truly be precise? Let's start by reviewing the history of this commonly quoted finding. Despite the fact that few know its origin, it originates from a study conducted by Mehrabian and Wiener in 1967. In their experiment, scientists read participants a list of words like dear, honey, truly, brute, and scram in a neutral, negative, or positive tone, and showed images of a range of matching or incongruent facial expressions. Judging by the sound of the words and feelings depicted in the images, they asked participants to determine the objective behind the words. They found that only 7% of the judgment was based on the real words, 38% was based upon tone, and 55% was based upon facial expressions, or, in other words, a total 93% nonverbal judgment. Given the method of this study, it is no wonder that participants mostly ignored the words, since they knew they were scripted, and instead paid close attention to paralinguistic hints. Does this suggest that nonverbal communication does not carry as much weight as a lot of us thought? The answer depends upon whether we perceive individuals' words to match their intentions. As research study co-author Albert Mehrabian later wrote, when there are inconsistencies between mindsets communicated verbally and posturally, the postural element ought to completely dominate in determining the overall mindset that is presumed. To put it simply, when somebody's words appear to match their nonverbal signals, we will likely fully pay attention to the words. It's only when we presume that someone's words do not match their nonverbal signals that we listen to nonverbal communication. So what can you do to be a much better communicator and keep away from misunderstandings? Create congruence between your verbal and nonverbal messages. If you are feeling miserable, be sure your facial expressions match. If you are happy, show it with your vocal tone and nonverbal communication. The more consistency you create, the more trust you will build, and the more your carefully chosen words will matter. Chapter 2. How to Identify a Flirt. Research finds that we're surprisingly bad at recognizing flirtation. You've got stunning eyes. Can I purchase you a beverage? This is just something that is typically said in a bar. Let's look into what's actually behind this. At times, flirting is entirely apparent, but typically it's more indirect and tentative. How properly can you decipher flirting from non-flirting? Are you very likely to misinterpret efforts just to be friendly as flirting? He's always flirting with me. No, he is not. Or, are you the sort of person who thinks real efforts at flirtation are just basic conversation? No one flirts with me. I'm attempting to flirt with you at this moment. That's sweet, but seriously, nobody flirts with me. Flirting is more complicated than you may think. By meaning, flirting is communicating in a way that signals attraction. Here's the thing, though. Many people aren't eager to experience direct rejection, so if they want to communicate interest, they might use indirect flirting methods, those that look like other non-flirting discussion, teasing, joking, or being friendly. Current research offers new insights into how precisely people detect real flirting conduct. The researchers brought complete strangers into the laboratory had them speak with one another for 10 or so minutes in a impressions task, then ask them questions about the interaction. How do people properly analyze flirting and non-flirting? Physical attraction is part of the formula. The more physically drawn-in individuals are to complete strangers, the more they are apt to flirt, as you may expect. Being physically attracted to a person, however, has no relation to the perception of flirting. Simply because you think someone is adorable does not mean you'll automatically translate neutral remarks as flirtation. Men and women are both bad at detecting flirting. When talking with some stranger, research suggests most people actually don't know flirting when they see it. In this research study, women were only 18% accurate in recognizing guys flirting as flirting. The men did better, but with only a 36 precision rate, they still are running way below chance. Most of the time, flirts just aren't perceived as flirting. People recognize non-flirting more properly than flirting. In this study, women were 83% precise in seeing non-flirting as non-flirting, and men performed about the same at 84%. It seems both men and women are far better at acknowledging the absence of flirting than recognizing real flirting. The default, it appears, is to presume no romantic interest. In general, these are rather disappointing results. With so many people misinterpreting actual flirting for neutral discussion, a lot of people could be losing out on romantic passion. At the same time, though, people tend not to overestimate flirting, which could be socially useful. After all, the effects of misinterpreting casual chatter for flirtation could be very serious. We're still entrusted to the puzzle of how to precisely detect flirting, a puzzle that seems a lot more crucial now that we know how improperly people do at the job in general. Clues that help you identify real flirting. Search for nonverbal signals. Nonverbal communication can speak volumes. Research suggests that people observe certain behaviors that can communicate romantic interest. In certain contexts, smiling, leaning forward and touching a person, and making eye contact can suggest romantic interest. Listen for verbal flirting. Both males and females are equally good at recognizing certain verbal communications as flirting. Specifically, they translate sexual interest from compliments, obvious recommendations to being single, available to date somebody else, and using moderate sexual innuendos as signs of interest. Consider the context. Proof suggests that flirting is more apt to happen in spots that have the following features: sociability, people can quickly talk to one another; alcohol, the classic social lubricant; and common interest. It's a meeting place for like-minded individuals. Flirting styles predict flirting behavior. Not everybody flirts the exact same way, so if you know a person's style, you can use setting hints to help sort out if they're flirting. Recent research showed that traditional flirts, who have the tendency to be reclusive, are cautious and polite when flirting at a party, bar, or academic setting. They are not the folks talking it up at the grocery store. Physical flirts, who use a lot of body language, like to playfully flirt across many contexts. Lively flirts are less polite than physical flirts and have a tendency to be highly extroverted, tossing care to the wind when flirting. They aren't so sincere in their flirting when the setting doesn't match the objective, like supermarkets, but are genuine when speed dating. Finally, the genuine flirt and the polite flirt both choose to be introduced to somebody, rather than initiating contact themselves, and are cautious in their approach. Is there consistency, distinctiveness, and consensus? Making use of Kelly's 1967 attribution model, decoding a prospective love match, are we flirting with one another, can be helped by considering 3 functions of your interactions. Are your interactions constant across time? Do you appear to flirt every time you see each other? Is the individual's behavior to you distinct or special? Not how he or she acts towards everyone else. Finally, how to behave. If there's a general agreement that the majority of people connect with this person the way you do, your interactions are not as likely credited to mutual attraction. However, high consistency, high diversity, and low consensus may suggest that you two have a connection. Might there be love in the air? Chapter 3. Body language cues that can get you into trouble. Unlike spoken or written communication, nonverbal communication is not a true language. Specific nonverbal cues are typically open up to interpretation or misconception by others. So take care with these possibly dangerous body language hints. 1. Gaze. Be careful where you look. This seems obvious, but we are sometimes oblivious to where our eyes are focused. A female associate once pointed this out to me, saying, "The boss never ever looks me in the eye. He is always making eye-to-breast contact." 2. Touch. Don't touch me there. Touching another individual can suggest nearness and intimacy, or signal compassion or concern. In other words, a pat on the hand or shoulder. However, an innocent touch can also be misinterpreted by others or crossing the line sexually, or as a put-down or show of supremacy. Touch others with care and planning. 3. Yawning. Didn't you get enough sleep? This happened to me while talking with a coworker. I discharged a reduced yawn. In my defense, I hadn't been getting enough sleep, and her instant response was, "Am I tiring you?" My apology was uncomfortable. 4. Handshake. Limp and clammy. Your handshake is specifically essential in a job interview or when meeting new people. Handshake should be firm, but not too firm. A limp handshake can signify disinterest. Paired with sweaty palms, it can cause a really bad first impression. 5. Personal space. Stay out of my bubble. We all carry a bubble of personal space around us, a convenient zone that others should keep out of unless we provide approval to get in. Getting too near somebody can make them awkward and even angry. Get out of my space. 6. Smiling. Why are you smiling? Smiles are challenging and are typically open to analysis by others. A smile at the wrong time might be translated as mocking a person. Research also shows that guys often misinterpret women's innocent smiles as flirty. Again, when it comes to smiling, like a gaze, be aware of the nonverbal cues you send to others and the context. 7. Self-touching. Do not keep your hands to yourself. Rubbing or wringing your hands and other forms of self-touching can be analyzed by others as signs of discomfort or anxiousness. And take care about self-grooming. A well-known Seinfeld episode has Jerry scratching his nose as his girlfriend views him from the side. "No choice, no choice," Jerry shouts, when he realizes what it looked a lot like from her angle. 8. Gestures. What did you just say to me? Some gestures, like words, have meaning, such as giving someone the finger. Understand, however, that seemingly innocent gestures in one culture may have an absolutely different meaning in another culture. Our thumbs up or okay gestures might be obscene in another society and even constitute fighting words. Chapter 4. The many subtle ways women signal romantic interest. Guys are usually taught to make the first move, push for the first kiss, and start ever higher levels of sexual intimacy with a woman. This kind of pressure to make the first move can feel burdensome. However, research shows that it is women who usually signal whether a guy can make an approach in the first place, initiating the entire process. Drawing from work on mating interactions among non-humans, mostly birds, scientists in the 80s and 90s recorded early courtship conduct in a series of creative observational studies carried out in bars, dance clubs, and other spots where people meet. These researchers carefully tracked the nonverbal techniques used to signal sexual interest. They consistently noted that women indicated guys who intrigued them, helping to ensure their approach. What are the nonverbal habits that women engage in to signal their interest in a particular man? Here was a typical scenario. A woman walks into a bar with some of her good friends. She takes part in a long, constant scan around the room, ultimately repairing her look on a guy she finds attractive. Gaze is essential here, and an essential element of signaling interest. The woman keeps an extended gaze at the man until he notices her. She smiles, then she breaks the look, returns the look again, smiles, and again breaks the look. A woman intrigued by a guy then might primp or self-groom, fixing her hair a bit, adopting an open body posture, in other words, arms from the body, or starting to orient her body to face him. Once he approaches, as he usually does, both orient their bodies to one another, and the woman might take part in other nonverbal habits, like palming, displaying an open wrist and palm, self-touching, such as a breast graze, or uncovering her neck, maybe by leaning back or canting her head. Once you know to look for these habits, you can see them all the time. Two recently familiarized people who are sexually fascinated by one another will show increasing synchrony in their gestures and movements, light touching, particularly by men, smiling, leaning forward, and head tilting. Many women might even see belatedly that they find a person appealing by observing themselves self-grooming a little when an attractive man enters the room. Research on other societies finds similar habits. An eyebrow flash integrated with a smile was a typical signal in a range of cultural backgrounds, from the Balinese to Papuans, French, and Waikiki Indians. What's really intriguing, however, is that though most women could specify some element of this signaling process, men typically were unaware that they had in fact been indicated by the woman they approached, thinking instead that they simply had the initiative to approach an attractive woman. Trained observers have been able to anticipate to a startling high degree of accuracy the results of interactions between women and guys based upon women's nonverbal signaling behaviors alone. Just one of the best predictors of who would be approached was indicating frequency. High-signaling women of average attractiveness were a lot more likely to be approached than low-signaling, beautiful counterparts. Moreover, the rate of signaling on the part of women was highly correlated with how much interest they generated in the guys. Some men wrongly approached a woman who had not indicated them, but they were normally closed down quickly. Researchers specify these people as having poor decoding capabilities. Women have a similarly impressive selection of nonverbal shutdown behaviors, like leaning away, crossing their arms over their chest, keeping away from eye contact, and negative grooming behaviors, such as picking a person's teeth, the mirror opposite of signaling habits. Regrettably, guys typically were worse at picking up rejection signals, judging them to be weaker forms of communication than women meant them to be. These field studies typically used evolutionary concept as a conceptual framework, so the focus tended to be on males and females' courtship behaviors, though other researchers have found great resemblance between the behaviors used by women indicating their sexual interest in males and females signifying their sexual interest in other women. There is an absence of more up-to-date research on signaling and flirting more normally. Yet flirting is necessary for conveying preliminary interest in a potential partner and keeping interest in a recognized relationship. Men tend to view flirting as more sexual and crucial than women do. Women tend to view flirting as more fun and relational. Existing applications in this line of research have become narrower, focusing to a great degree on eye look as a metric of sexual interest versus romantic love. Neurophysiological research has found that simple eye contact with an attractive person activates reward-related brain parts and prompts approach. Flirting and expressing interest in starting a relationship now rely heavily on written forms of communication in new digital technology environments. We may be spending ever-increasing hours meeting new people through our virtual worlds, but eventually we connect in person and count on our nonverbal habits to convey much more than words alone can do. Chapter 5. Flirting Techniques for Women. As it ends up, a few pioneering researchers have covertly watched women flirting in bars and in schools to answer these extremely interesting questions. Through their observations, they have found a number of nonverbal habits and body language hints that women use to indicate their potential interest to guys, and motivate guys to approach them also. Nonverbal courtship patterns in women. The first study I reviewed came from Moore from 1985, who performed an observational study of women flirting in bars and on a college campus. Particularly, Moore had 2 trained observers covertly watch more than 200 single women in those locations for about 30 minutes each and record the women's nonverbal solicitation signals. Furthermore, the scientists described these solicitation signals as a motion of body parts or whole body that led to male attention, operationally described within 15 seconds following the behavior. Male attention was further described as a guy approaching the woman, talking with her, asking her to dance, and even, in a few instances, kissing her. From those observations, Moore identified 52 nonverbal behaviors that women use to signal their potential interest in a guy. Of those, some of the most regularly performed habits by women were: solitary dance. While seated or standing, the woman moved her body in time to music playing. Room-encompassing glance. The woman looked around the room for about 5 to 10 seconds without making eye contact with others. Brief darting glance. The woman gave a sideways 2 to 3 second glance at a guy of interest. Look fixate. The woman made eye contact with a guy of interest for more than 3 seconds. Head toss. The woman flipped her head backward and raised her face up briefly. Hair flip. The woman raised one hand up and then pushed it through her hair. Smile. The corners of the mouth were turned upward, at times showing teeth. Lean. The woman moved her upper body forward, closer to the man. Neck presentation. The woman tilted her head to one side, about 45 degrees, revealing the opposite side of her neck. Laugh or giggle. Generally, laughing or giggling was a reaction to a conversation with a guy. Head nod. Generally, in conversation with a guy, the woman nodded in contract. Beyond these flirting habits, once a man approached, women also touched in some ways to show interest also. Typically, they caressed a thing or the man's face, arm, leg, or back. Or the woman may position herself so her knee, thigh, or foot were touching the man to show interest. In some circumstances, a woman may even start a hug or hang off a guy. A follow-up research study by Moore and Butler in 1989 assessed some of these behaviors better. In this particular case, the researchers were interested in discovering which of these flirting and solicitation habits actually worked to get guys to method. The team again in bars, this time observing the distinctions in behavior between single women who were approached by a man versus women who didn't get approached. The results of their operations showed some considerable behavioral differences between women who were approached and those that were not. Especially, women who were approached usually smiled at guys, danced on their own, nodded at guys, leaned toward them, or slanted their head back, neck presentation, while women who didn't get approached performed none of those habits. Further, women who were approached were more likely to also look around the room, flip their hair, toss their head, and focus their glance on a specific man. Beyond those behavioral differences, Moore and Butler, from 1989, examined the general attractiveness of the women observed. On average, there was no difference in beauty between women who were approached and those that were not. Because of this, the guys approaching the women were a result of the women's behavioral distinctions, not their looks. Truth be told, according to the analysis, an unattractive woman who showed a lot of solicitation behaviors was more likely to be approached by guys than an attractive woman who did not display solicitation behaviors. The research studies here generally line up with previous research I have reviewed on flirting and body language. Considering that, the best way for a woman to signal her interest in a guy is to look at him and smile, while having actually open and relaxed body language. More particularly, in the research studies above, the women who were approached by men were having fun, dancing, smiling, and looking around. Simply put, they looked friendly and interested. If you are a woman and look for interest from a guy, start by looking interested in him. Catch his eye by taking a look around the room, dancing, moving closer, or flipping your hair. When you get his attention, look at him and smile. As he approaches, show that you're receptive by nodding or tilting your head. Once a guy approaches, flirting ends up being more about leaning in close, laughing, and touching. Actually, touching is very appealing and convincing. Even unintentional touching can lead to intimacy. So, caress your glass, find a reason to slide into the seat next to him, and get better familiarized. If you're a man wondering whether a woman is interested, search for the habits above. If a woman is looking around and flipping her hair, pay attention. If she makes eye contact and smiles at you, start the ball rolling and start a conversation. If she likes what you need to say and touches you, then it could be time to ask her out. Discovering these flirting habits helps both men and women learn more about one another better. If you are a woman, use them to send clear signals, and the men you like might be more likely to say hi. If you are a guy, try to find those flirting signals, and your own technique could be more likely to get a warm reception. Chapter 6. The New Communication Minimalism. Depression and suicide rates are rising sharply among young Americans. One aspect is social networks increasing anxiety, as users tire themselves in the dopamine rat race on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. It's an unregulated and boundless marketplace that puts them in a 24-hour competition for recognition with everybody else in the world, leading not only to FOMO, fear of missing out, but also a worry of not sufficing, a worry of not being a person. Youths are dealing with how to communicate, with experience overload, and perhaps most importantly, with needing to navigate a lot of possible identities. Self-promotion and personal branding are not the only pressure cookers on social media. The platforms are also significantly weaponized for asymmetrical information wars sustained by fake news, as the Philippines-based reporter and activist Maria Ressa underscored in a moving talk she gave at the DLD conference in Munich last week. A lie that is repeated 1,000,000 times ends up being a fact, she reminded the audience. On the exact same panel, MIT expert Sinan Errol added that it was half-truths in particular that contributed to spreading out virally because they involved just enough truth to get reliability and just enough made truths to be magnificent enough to provoke imagination. Aside from regulation, new metrics such as the idea of conversational health that Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey has been touting lately, or total abstinence, what might be other, more better ways of designing for and living a very good life on social media? a rejection to explain in words. One possible escape from the anxiety of social media is communication minimalism, a new trend both online and in the real world that strips communication to its essence, removes all intricacy and also the need for precision, and lowers it to something that we feel rather than we do. Communication that's being haptic or totally silent and that does not have to hold true, but rather feel true. From hieroglyphs to emoji, nonverbal means of communication have been used for centuries, but a new slate of product or services are now taking nonverbal to the extreme with a focus on fostering intimacy. In times of growing social seclusion, isolation, more than 3 in 5 Americans are lonely, and mental health problems, intimacy is both a scarce resource and a much-needed companion. Take silent book clubs, a phenomenon that began with 2 friends meeting in a San Francisco bar. They were sick of the assigned readings of standard book clubs and just wanted to read what they wanted. However, they didn't want to forfeit the company of others that comes with being a member of a book group. The format has since gotten traction, not just as a boon for introverts, but for everyone who appreciates silence as the great equalizer and a reliable driver of social intimacy amongst complete strangers. Silent book club members can bring any book they want, and they could go over the book with other guests or just read together in silent communion. There are now more than 100 active chapters around the globe, from Cape Town to Dubai to Stockholm. A touch without touching. When its social value exceeds its helpful function, scientists call a communication phatic. This phatic quality is exemplified by Bond Touch, a new product or service for 2 users, allowing them to communicate with one another simply by sending digital touches at any given moment via slick designer bracelets. Think of it as poking in the physical world with digital means. When one user sends a touch to the other's wristband vibrates and lights up. No words, just a light and a touch. Now, you could wonder, why not just send a text message? The answer is simple. Too complex. Too high of a real chance for miscommunication. Some declare Bond Touch as the hero of long-distance relationships, others as an extra physical digital bond for couples, parents and their kids, associates, friends, or complete strangers who see value in being physically reminded that the other person exists and considers them in that real moment. The service offers a touch history and even replays of past touches, and ultimately, according to the website, an encrypted and private space to share all memories with your one and only love. With this focus on exclusivity, Bond Touch is thus not just pleasing a desire for simpleness in our communications, but also for simplicity in our relationships. While some may find it weird, one can comprehend the item's appeal. There's something, touching about the idea of an extremely complicated world in which a simple remote touch can help us cultivate a relationship. Hearts without bodies. Eventually, we could not even need a digital pulse and may instead rely on our heartbeats as the cadence of human-to-human communications. Absolutely, nothing is more direct and nothing is more sincere. While our hearts might mislead us from time to time, they usually do not lie. Driven by this insight, the artist duo Diogo Teixeira and Diana Galiajevic created an installation called Heartbeat that invites 2 people to listen to one another's heartbeats in a quasi-private setting. Enhanced by highly sensitive microphones and witnessed by an attentive small audience, the installation develops an intuitive bond between 2 strangers by foregoing any rhetorical barriers. There is something reassuring in reducing human communication to the fundamental system of the physical body, but interestingly, experiences of intimacy do not have to include sex. Quite the opposite. In recent years, one could observe a desire to free relationships from the detailed layers of meaning and the power structures that come with it. Truth be told, the number of young Americans reporting to not have had sex in the former year has doubled to 23% between 2008 and 2018. The no-sex rate among young American men in particular has almost tripled at the time of that period. An escape from complexity. Maybe communication minimalism is the new celibacy. Heartbeats, bond touches, and silent book clubs provide an escape path from complexity and ambiguity. They allow us to feel more without the risk of being hurt, to touch each other emotionally without getting entangled. They all point to a new essentialism ensuring us that we can still manage the signals in the middle of all of the sound if we only lower the noise and focus solely on the signals. Communication is a true miracle and a minefield. With all of the nuances around political accuracy, the continuous chatter of social networks, and each and every single one of our words online recorded and possibly shared in broad daylight, it is no surprise that we end up being more reserved, keep back, or retreat entirely. Words are gifts, but also weapons. Using them can do harm and restrict the possibilities. Absolutely nothing said can be unsaid, and to remain a complete person, it could be better to keep most words for ourselves. Chapter 7. A Radical Idea for Boosting Verbal Abilities and Happiness. Would you like to enhance your relationships? Move ahead faster in your profession? How about doing a much better job preparing kids for their futures? One good way to do this is to sharpen your verbal abilities. Think about it. We are a social species who greatly depend upon one another for love, emotional support, physical well-being, income and education, and almost every other thing that matters in life. And language has developed as a main means by which we reap the benefits of our social nature. It's through language that we comprehend those around us and reveal our ideas and needs. It is through language that we show others who we are and what we are capable of. It's through language that we bridge the gap between ourselves and those around us. So it needs to come as no surprise that communication problems are at the top of the list of reasons that couples look for counseling, or that poor verbal skills stop otherwise gifted employees from advancing, or that college entrance tests heavily emphasize verbal capability. But let's face it, taking writing classes, public speaking classes, or improving reading comprehension takes work, a ton of it. Who has time for that? Wouldn't it be great if there were a basic, fun way to turn out to be better communicators just through daily living? Well, new research on the relationship between character and verbal ability suggests that there is. You may be able to improve your verbal abilities just by opening yourself up to new experiences. William Revell and co-workers at Northwestern University discovered that the Big Five personality trait of openness favorably associated with multiple steps of verbal capability. The characteristic of openness makes up a desire for new experiences and ideas, along with a gratitude of art, poetry, and abstract thinking. Personality researcher Colin DeYoung, who also found a correlation between verbal skills and openness, suggested that people who are open to new experiences learn and retain info better, giving them an edge in communication ability. This does not guarantee that opening yourself up to going to new spots, meeting new people, reading unfamiliar authors, or going for nature walks will make you a much better communicator. However, it stands to reason that expanding your aperture on the world will increase the breadth and depth of your knowledge and give you more fascinating things to communicate. So here's a question. How do you accumulate both an openness and verbal skill? do these qualities associate in you? And how do you stack up with other readers of this blog? Constantly pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone does for your brain what weightlifting does for your muscles. It grows and sustains healthy tissue. So the next time your partner suggests that you go to a film that you don't want to see, go to a relative you do not want to go to, or holiday in a place that you don't want to holiday, open yourself up to the experience and say yes. You might not be happy with the outcome, but your brain will be. Chapter 8. Nonverbal Communication Across Cultures. Next time you are having a discussion with someone, notice how much of the content is communicated without words. Let's say your boss calls you to her office, hands you your examination report, and says, "I am speechless." Since the report is in a firmly sealed envelope and your boss is temporarily robbed of speech, you're going to search for nonverbal clues from her face, gestures, posture, intonation about your fate. Did she exclaim those words with a happy smile while extending her arm for a handshake? Or did she whisper them through pursed lips with a deep frown dividing her eyebrows? In any case, the picture painted by your boss's nonverbal cues will probably communicate more information to you in that immediate moment than her words. In an intercultural context, when our interlocutors don't share our linguistic and cultural backgrounds, nonverbal communication takes on a particularly poignant role. It can make the distinction between appearing genuine and being misconstrued. It can bring people together or pull them apart. It can help us speak and read volumes without comprehending a word of each other's languages. Psychologist David Matsumoto is a well-known expert on nonverbal conduct, culture, and emotion. Here he is, in his own words, on the weighty repercussions of nonverbal communication across cultures. 1. What role does nonverbal conduct play in cross-cultural communication? To comprehend this, we really need to understand the role of nonverbal conduct in any communication. Just as we're talking now, you are nodding and smiling, and I'm getting a signal that you are following what I am saying, maybe even agreeing with me. That is an example of back-channel communication, and it greases the wheels of any sort of communication. Plainly, words are extremely essential simply because they communicate a particular content. However, nonverbal behavior also communicates content, and far more. The function of all communication is to share inclinations, and nonverbal conduct plays a role in that as well. It helps us to share our emotions, arrangements, and disagreements, hence helping us to communicate our intents together with verbal language. 2. What are some common obstacles of nonverbal communication across cultures? Consider the people you know who are proficient in languages but do not get along well with others from different cultures. Part of the reason is that verbal language by itself only communicates a specific amount of content. An individual who only develops their language skills without the nonverbal habits that are connected with that language doesn't discover well. People can be saying the content they want to communicate, but just not relate properly because a lot of what's being communicated is nonverbal. This can result in intercultural dispute, misunderstandings, and ambiguities in communication, regardless of language fluency. Yet nonverbal behavior can also grease communication when there's a lack of language fluency. I am certain anybody who is interculturally competent can go to any country where they don't speak the language and still be able to interact well with others. Information shows that language classes that incorporate nonverbal communication and civilization in their curricula fare better than standard language classes that focus on the language only. 3. What advice would you have for becoming more efficient when interacting non-verbally with people from different cultures. I have 3 tips. 1. You should try to be enjoyable. Many people like pleasant people, and a basic smile goes a long way. 2. Be interested. Show interest in others, languages, and cultural artifacts. Ask questions. Then intercultural interaction doesn't end up being a hassle. It ends up being an experience. 3. Just try to learn something crucial about the language and civilization of your interlocutor. An example could be this. Learn and try some easy phrases. Good morning, please, and thank you go a long way to greasing many interactions. A lot of people will then feel like they want to help you out, which can help you get over any sort of communication problems. Plus, you'll grow as you connect. 4. Which emotion is simplest to communicate across civilizations, and which one is most vulnerable to misconceptions? Most convenient one to communicate is joy. Being nice and enjoyable is easy to communicate. It's free and has most impact. All other feelings are susceptible to misunderstanding. One could be frustrated, disgusted, sad, stunned, afraid, or concerned, and all of these feelings can be misinterpreted somehow. But positivity isn't normally misinterpreted. Importantly, one has to also think about how one regulates their emotions and expressions in various interactions, simply because what they may bring about a feeling in one could not be what's actually going on in the other. It's true for interpersonal interactions, ask any newlywed, and intercultural communication. 5. What are some advantages of being proficient at nonverbal communication? In the setting of intercultural communication, I think the primary benefit is that if you are good at nonverbal communication, then you can go wherever without knowing the language, and you'll get along. It's easier to have efficient intercultural interactions, even without knowing the language, when you are skilled in nonverbal communication. As a species, we have been counting on our nonverbal channels to send and receive messages for significantly longer than the evolution of our languages. Even though our civilizations commit us to different ways of expressing ourselves without words, we are much more comparable than we may think. As Dr. Matsumoto mentions, the clinical data on most all mental procedures, attributes, and behaviors shows that the cultural differences among us are much smaller than our individual differences. Despite our propensity to lose focus of our similarities and instead to highlight our differences, many people in the world want to get along, says Matsumoto. As with all relationships, communication is crucial. That's when our nonverbal abilities can help us to better connect to other members of our human family, even when words fail us. Chapter 9. What is the importance of nonverbal communications? I was just recently asked during an interview about the relative importance of nonverbal communication in our daily lives, and I replied that I couldn't think of a moment when nonverbals were trivial. When pushed to offer 3 examples of when nonverbal communication was particularly crucial, I suggested the following 3. Arguing that these were also, in my viewpoint, the most important things we do as humans, and so it is not a surprise we do these 3 things nonverbally. Mate selection. We want to believe that we are above such insignificant things as how an individual looks, how tall they are, the color of their hair, how they smell, how they feel, what the tone of their voice is like, how they walk, how they dance, how their eyes look at us, and even the color of those small pupils. And yet all the research shows that we pick our mates on those very essential messages that we receive and interpret nonverbally. Courtship decisions, after all, aren't based upon a written exam or a resume. Those choices are influenced by nonverbals that we pick up through our senses at a conscious and subconscious level. Are we then not attracted by words? Of course, words can be seductive. Poetry, for instance, just as intellect can be appealing. But in the end, in every culture studied where individuals have a choice and do not count on arranged marriages, it is the nonverbals that are primarily accountable for who we end up with, and that is no small matter. Child rearing. Infants enter the world not able to speak. Through every little thing from squirming in their diapers to making cooing noises and to smiling and frowning, babies telegraph their needs, wants, and desires, and also when they're distressed or awkward. It's through nonverbals that we communicate love as parents, and through touch we bond reciprocally with a child. No amount of words can compensate for a hug, a smile, or a soft caress. It's through nonverbals that we learn if a child is sick, has a fever, or has seeing, hearing, or even neurological issues. If not for nonverbal communication, how would an infant know if it's loved and invited? But it doesn't end there. When that child participates in the first day of school, it is their nonverbals at the end of the day that attest to how every little thing went, even before they say a word. Evaluating risk. Imagine trusting everybody who comes to your front door wanting to come in just based on their words. Have you ever looked behind you while at an ATM to see who might be standing too close? We live in a world where predators are no longer of the four-legged variety, and yet we still freeze in place when we see a snarling pet dog, as our forefathers froze when they saw a lioness. We still examine for threat non-verbally, just because it is critical to our survival, as Gavin de Becker wrote in The Gift of Fear. That is the reason that during the night, as we get into our cars, we look to see if a person is tracking our movements or getting too close. We do not ask strangers if they will hurt us. We evaluate them non-verbally to determine their intent and dependability. These were but 3 examples, and there are many more. And so to the question, to what degree do non-verbal communication means matter, I would answer that non-verbal ways to communicate are the not without for social relationships, maybe even for our survival. Chapter 10. Typical Forms of Verbal Abuse in Relationships. If we look at verbal abuse as a method of preserving control and power over someone, we can think of the kinds of verbal abuse listed and explained in this book as being ways that someone tries to completely dominate or control their partner. Does this mean that the abuser actually feels more effective when he or she, for example, discreetly puts down his partner's interest? Yes, as incomprehensible as this is to some of us. Does this mean that their partner feels put down? Not always. He or she might feel a twinge of sadness because they can't share this interest. Or she or he could feel a twinge of sadness that their partner cannot enjoy, say, a certain artist or composer. Does this mean that the abuser cannot or does not enjoy this pleasure? Not always. She or he may simply find greater satisfaction in feeling that they have power over their partner. We will also see that verbal abuse prevents real relationships. That appears apparent, but the partner of an abuser could live under the illusion that he or she has a real relationship. That could be for some reasons. An essential one is that, as a couple, the abuser and their partner could function sufficiently in their particular roles. Verbal abusers generally experience many of their feelings as anger. An example would be the following. If a spoken abuser feels not sure and anxious, he may simply feel angry, possibly angry that he is feeling not sure and anxious. Yet part of being human is the capability to feel. The ability to feel, like the ability to think, is universal to humankind. Sadly, the abuser is normally unwilling to accept his emotions and reluctant to reveal them to a partner. He builds a wall between himself and his partner and preserves that distance. In the verbally violent relationship, Patricia Evans determines certain categories of verbal abuse. Some are clear, while others are more subtle. 1. Withholding. Withholding is mainly manifested as a withholding of info and a failure to share ideas and emotions. A person who keeps info refuses to engage with his or her partner in a healthy relationship. She or he doesn't share emotions or thoughts. When she or he does share anything, it is simply accurate or functioning information of the sort their partner could have looked up online, continue reading his or her Facebook wall, or figured out on their own. Examples of withholding communication that struggle to engage the partner include: the automobile is practically out of gas, the keys are on the table, and the show is on now. 2. Countering. Countering is a tendency to be argumentative, not merely in political, philosophical, or clinical context, but in normal context also. The victim of the abuse could share her positive feelings about a motion picture she just saw, and the abuser may then attempt to convince her that her emotions are wrong. This is countering or dismissing the victim's emotions, thoughts, and experiences regularly. 3. Discounting. Discounting is an effort to deny that the victim of the abuse has any right to his or her thoughts or emotions. It may come out as criticism, but criticism of a certain kind. The abuser might tell the victim regularly that he or she is too sensitive, too childish, has no funny bone, or tends to make a huge deal out of nothing. The abuser consequently denies the victim's inner reality, indirectly telling a partner that how they feel and what they experience is wrong. 4. Verbal abuse disguised as jokes. The abuser could say something very upsetting to the victim of the abuse and, after seeing her reaction, add, "It was just a joke." Abuse isn't okay in any form. Jokes that hurt are abusive. 5. Obstructing and diverting. Obstructing and diverting is a kind of withholding in which the abuser decides which subjects are good discussion subjects. An abuser practicing this form of abuse could tell the victim that she's talking out of turn or is complaining too much. 6. Accusing and blaming. In these forms of abuse, the abuser will implicate the victim of things that are outside of his or her control. She or he may implicate a partner of stopping them from getting a promotion because the partner is overweight, or destroying his or her reputation because the partner quit college. 7. Judging and criticizing. Judging and criticizing is similar to implicating and blaming, but also involves an unfavorable examination of the partner. As Evans mentions, most "you" declarations are judgmental, critical, and violent. Some abusive judging and criticizing "you" statements are, "You are never ever satisfied," "You always find something to be upset about," and "Nobody likes you because you are so negative." 8. Trivializing. Trivializing is a form of verbal abuse that makes most things the victim of the abuse does or wants to do seem irrelevant. The abuser may undermine his or her work, style of dress, or choice of food. 9. Undermining. Weakening is similar to trivializing, which includes weakening every little thing the victim says or suggests, or making her question herself and her own viewpoints and interests. 10. Threatening. Threatening is a common form of verbal abuse and can be extremely explicit, such as, "If you don't begin doing what I say, I will leave you." Or it can be more subtle, such as, "If you do not follow my advice, others will find out that you are a really unreliable individual." 11. Name-calling. Name-calling can be explicit or subtle. Explicit name-calling can consist in calling the victim of the abuse a bitch or other painful words. But it can also be more subtle, like when somebody says things that are implicitly upsetting. For instance, "You are such a victim," or "You think you are so valuable, don't you?" 12. Forgetting. The classification of forgetting covers a variety of issues ranging from forgetting a guarantee to forgetting a date or a visit. Even if the abuser truly forgot, it is still abuse, just because he ought to have made an effort to remember. 13. Ordering. Any form of ordering or demanding is a kind of verbal abuse. It falls under the general issue of control. 14. Denial. Denial is abusive when it includes denying someone's bad behavior and failing to understand the repercussions of this behavior. An abuser will always try to find a way to validate and justify his conduct. This is a way of denying that he has done anything wrong. 15. Abusive anger. Any form of shouting and shrieking, particularly out of context. Even yelling, "Shut up," is violent. No one really deserves to be chewed out. This has been How to Analyze People: Verbal and Nonverbal Communication, Flirting, and Abuse. Written by Aries Helen. Narrated by Dean Collins.